Welcome to The Table, a new show from Byline TV. Here we aim to have productive conversations about things that matter, and we will have them with people that we might not always agree with. At this table, there's no hiding behind sound bites, slogans, or headlines. Every position must be justified, and nothing is off the table. At the table tonight, we have Bonnie Greer, playwright, novelist, and broadcaster. Benjamin Butterworth, late editor of the newspaper, journalist and broadcaster, and Mahyar Tousi, political commentator and talk radio host. And trying to steer you all through it, me as your host, Marina Purkis. Tonight we'll be covering the fallout from the Supreme Court ruling on Roe Vs Wade, the suitability of Prince Charles as our future king, and the role of race and class in social mobility. So, let's get straight to it. First topic of the evening, Roe versus Wade. So 5 days ago, the US Supreme Court overturned the constitutional right to legal abortion in the US. This was a move that sent shockwaves across the globe. Now, is this just a US concern? Many people think this could never happen here in Britain, but is it closer than we think? Let's start with you, Bonnie. What do you think?
With Roe v. Wade, especially, I had an abortion, and I had it right before Roe v. Wade, so therefore it was illegal. And I can remember the machinations I had to go through. I was lucky because everybody knew a doctor who performed it, and they still do. It's the way it's going to be. You had to go at night, after hours. You had to hope that the nurse and the doctor, they were together because it was against the law. And that was very traumatic to do that. And there's a generation of women who don't know that world, where you have to do that. The issue with Roe v. Wade is, and I think the battle has been going on, for 50 years, but it's been going on longer than that. I grew up in an America that was about transformation. The America that's at battle now is against the people who are about restoration. And what they want to do is to bring back the 1950s and even beyond that. So Roe v. Wade, and I'm sorry to be long-winded, but it's important to explain this. Roe v. Wade was affirmed under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. There's the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th. They call them the slavery amendments. And the 13th abolished slavery forever. And the 14th Amendment affirms the right to privacy. In other words, my ancestors' bodies belonged to any white person who wanted to own that body. So under Roe v. Wade, under that amendment, there's a Section 3, Roe v. Wade was affirmed as a privacy provision, and every American has the right to privacy. So I have the right to privacy over my body. In other words, what they said to my ancestors was, nobody could come up to you, a white person can come up to you in Ohio or Louisiana and say, I'm taking you in. Okay. What has happened is we have a group of conservatives, youngish conservatives, and when I say youngish, they're in their 50s, which means that's young for the Supreme Court to be around for the next 30, 40 years. They come from what's called a originalist school. In other words, and this is Alicia who leads it, who wrote the majority opinion. The originalist school believes that you cannot assume what the founding fathers had in their minds when they framed the Constitution. So in other words, whatever is in the Constitution had to have existed at the time of the Constitution. So therefore, since abortion was not imagined by the founding fathers, it cannot be assumed to be protected under the federal government, and will take it back to the states where all of the rights evolved from the states, called the United States. So the knock-on effect of this is going to be a lot. For instance, if Louisiana decides that two men can't get married because that's not natural or whatever, it'll be illegal. If Mississippi decides that affirmative action, in other words, helping my ethnic minority people get on the ladder of education is unfair, it won't exist. So if you're a Texan, your uterus belongs to Texas. If you have a functioning uterus, it belongs to Texas. If you are a Missouri resident, your uterus belongs to Missouri. And not only that, Missouri is next to my home state of Illinois, where women have pro-choice. You can go to Illinois to have the procedure. Missouri can prosecute you for murdering a potential Missouri resident. And so, of course, women's fertility, you know, their period apps are going to be checked. It's going to be horrible.
It's absolutely terrifying. And I mean, this is obviously something that's happening in the US. Benjamin, do you think this is something we should be worried about coming over to the UK?
I mean, look, there is no significant movement to ban abortion in the way that some US states are now able to do. And you know, we should take some comfort in that it's not a mainstream opinion in this country, not in the Conservative Party or in the country. In fact, I think it's something that's taken so for granted that it doesn't cross most people's minds. I know when
I'm just going to interject there because I think you might be wrong, because in 2019 there was a vote in Parliament on decriminalising abortion in Northern Ireland. 99 British MPs, mostly Tory and DUP, some of which are now our cabinet ministers and senior Tory MPs, voted to keep it as an illegal act. Dominic Raab, Suella Braverman, Therese Coffey, or Andrew Bridgen, the usual suspects.
Although, like same-sex marriage, they actually ended up overriding it. So, you know,
but it's there, it's bubbling.
But the point I was going to make was that, you know, I think the problem is that it's not something that's a big debate at the moment, but where America leads, much of the Western world ends up following. And so what it definitely does is that it allows this to be a live question that people are going to debate. And so those people that haven't had much of a voice, that haven't really got very far, that are opposed to women's rights to control their own bodies and other people that can give birth, well, now they feel like they are empowered. And I think if you look back at what's happened in the last couple of years, you know, Brexit wasn't about transgender people or culture wars, and yet it empowered the people that took those sets of views. It made them get funding, get organised, find each other. It made them see the niche to exploit, and so many other cracks have been opened because of that. And I think when you look at this, it's going to send a clear message to people that take those regressive views that there is power there to be taken, and you'll push it. And, you know, in Parliament today, Danny Kruger, a Conservative MP, he said that he doesn't believe that women have complete autonomy over their own bodies, and that shouldn't be the case. Now, he presumably thought that all along, but the fact that he stated that in Parliament, well, I don't think he would have done that today had Roe Vs Wade not happened in the US a week ago, and that's why it's dangerous.
Which is also, by the way, a shattering thing for him to say, because Prue Leith, who is, she's the famous chef, she famously, I did check this, it's on the record, she did have a backstreet abortion, you know, back in her wild days. So the fact that her son has so publicly come out and said this, I think is quite shocking. And Mahyar, what are your thoughts?
I mean, firstly, I agree with Benjamin in this situation when it comes to I'm sick and tired of importing stuff from America. But when it comes to the most overall human stuff, yes, America is still leading the world, and especially the West. Anything that it starts there, it comes here, whether it's the internet or Hollywood or things like that. But we also overestimate the power of the American wave, because even in this country, who are still the closest to them compared to mainland Europe or the rest of the continents, when it comes to certain things, even us, the rest of the world, we say, yeah, we don't want this. This is too much. Certain cultural issues, certain the angry battles and certain things, but at the same time. So whether it was both sides of the Black Lives Matter debate, so you got the actual ethno-nationalist side, and you had the other side, the very militant side, that didn't come here because we were like, we don't want that here, that debate. But Benjamin's also right that might actually, these sort of things would actually then create an invisible platform, at least short term, for other issues, for, again, both sides, militant sides, to be like, well, now that we're talking about abortion, let's talk about this. But again, it doesn't really apply to everything else. The Northern Ireland issue is very specific because politicians, especially in the House of Commons, they're all generally out of touch and they're all reactionary. They're no longer proactive, they're all reactive. So they were, especially the Tory side, they were like, well, we're going to have to vote on this. And Northern Ireland, we need the DUP. To be conservative in Northern Ireland, we have to basically be on this side. So they just, without realizing, they just vote for those sort of measures there. Like, for example, when it comes to criminalization or decriminalization of state authority. But in reality, they will not be brave enough to have some sort of legislation to do for the overall UK. They know there's no consensus.
You say this at the same time that we've got a government who, yesterday we had the police crime and sentencing bill come into force, which has stripped us of our right to protest peacefully.
Yep.
You've also got this deviation from the European Convention of Human Rights, this UK Bill of Rights. All it does is weaken our rights. So I don't know. I don't think it is just tactical.
No. So the Convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, that's a whole different debate, and that's one of those things that if you end it,
it's an erosion of rights.
Then you can actually you could go either way. Like, for example, if you have a Labour Prime Minister or a Tory Prime Minister, if you withdraw from the convention, you can go either way. Like, you can actually either completely lose more rights, or you could actually maintain
going on the track record of this government. Do you really think they're going to bolster?
I mean, I don't trust it's going with anything, generally speaking, or even the other side. But this doesn't really help the argument for when it comes to the policing stuff, because certain policies, unfortunately, there is a consensus in the country. The people in this country are still quite authoritarian. They are social conservatives. They want law and order, and if you give them a referendum, they want to hang everybody. So the policing.
Well, that's the deal. I think. Boris Johnson is not really a Tory, okay?
No,
so he's just Boris Johnson off the telly. So when they finally figure out a way to get rid of him, which they will, because he's going to lose their election, then they're going to put in place the people you're talking about, because the heart of the Conservative Party is not David Cameron Party or George Osborne or even Boris Johnson. It's the Daily Mail. It's that branch of small c conservative. And it's very possible, it's not impossible. The good thing about this country is that we have nations here, and they're devolved. So they make their decisions about what they want to do with what's considered health care. But I think women should still be vigilant about this and not take it for granted that it couldn't happen here. I really do.
Agreed. And also, sorry, Benjamin, did you have a point?
No, go on.
I was going to say, do we really think, because obviously this is being championed as a pro-life move, right? Now, do we really, at this table, do we believe that's the genuine rationale behind this debate, or is there something more sinister to it than this? Benjamin?
Are you talking about the US?
Well, the whole pro-life movement, is it really about pro-life, or is it about something else?
Well, look, there are people with sincerely held, mistaken views that view that life starts at the first moment that it's...
Not all of them do, yeah.
That it's created, right? And so, that's not the view that most women take in the US, let alone in this country. And it's also a principal argument, really, because women are entitled to be opposed to abortion, to not have an abortion themselves. That is something they're perfectly entitled to think for themselves, but they're not allowed to tell other people what to do. And I think that's the principle that you should be guided by. And that's why, actually, you've seen a lot of right-wing commentators in this country, especially in the wake of the vaccine debate, that take that view about why it's wrong to criminalise abortion in any way, because it's about you controlling your body. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable attitude to take. But the truth is that, I think we live in culture war times. And the danger here is that you look at the incredible slide over the past couple of years. So Friday is 50 years since the first Pride March in this country, and I've been speaking to prime ministers, activists, involved bodies about how that happened and the change that happened. And they all say about how actually people aren't particularly socially conservative, as Mahyar said. When it came to it, people like other people, and so they want people to live their lives and be happy. And so in my lifetime, I hadn't seen a great pushback against these things. I grew up under Tony Blair. But you look back to the last couple of years, and now you see things like gay men adopting being something that is raised as a question on television and on social media. You see huge opposition, like the questions about who should be allowed to go in which bathrooms in public, a question that had been going on in the US for some years and hadn't happened here at all. Now, the law that affects that was passed in 2004-5, the Gender Recognition Act, but it's become one of the hottest debates in the last couple of years, and that's because they're pushing this culture war divide. And I think when you look at that, that's why there is reason to be concerned that a question like abortion could be on the horizon in the future.
But what's latent here, and I've lived here half my life, what's latent here is an anti-democratic feeling. This isn't really a democratic country. I mean, I think people actually don't trust democracy. They pretend they do, but they don't. I think the second thing is we have to remember is that this country criminalized homosexuality. Alan Turing died because he was homosexual. So that's always there. Young people now, and when I say young, I'm talking about people who came up in the 80s, who came of age and who were gay, LGBTQ, they have a reality that's very recent in this country, extremely recent. It was never live, let live here. I mean, that's a fallacy. So it is very possible, I'm not sure, but I think it's very possible that things can very gently regress without people knowing it. And I think, you know, for younger people, for millennials and whatever, to think that it's always been this way, no, only in your lifetime, my young people. That's only 30 years.
To be fair, I do agree that we should never be complacent on any issue, whether we're debating any left-wing or right-wing issue. But because actually I agree with you that we don't really have full democracy here, and there has never been an appetite, basically there's been an invisible illusion of freedom and kind of democracy, but the system works because of that. And there's no, I mean, never say never, but no, there hasn't been an example really as a wave of, in this country, the evolution of this country going backwards. It's always evolved. And of course, there have been like ups and downs, bumps in the road, but overall, we achieved most of the things that we achieved without having a need of a revolution. We did by evolution. I mean, there have been a lot of fights.
British don't do revolution.
Yeah, we do a lot of movements. We go knock on the door of the politicians. I mean, that's how we get the rights. But having said that, because of that, actually, this issue, again, not to be complacent completely, but in reality, the Brits are what I call pro-life liberals. You know, everybody is basically, not in terms of the extreme version of the spectrum. Every single person I know, every female person I know that has gone through abortion, and they're all mainstream people, but they all suffered with the decision. It's not. It's a
very hard decision.
It's not let's have a party. I'll just kill the fetus.
No.
But in reality, it works for our culture because if you, for example, ban it, the black market that it will create, the chaos that it will create would not really help. So it's probably not best to completely compare the American debate to the British debate in terms of the actual morality of it, but not in terms of the complacency, because anything could happen.
But I was going to say, I think we're having a crisis of empathy at the moment, and it goes back to something that I know, Bonnie, you often talk about, and that's the tribes that we are in now. It is somehow expedient to not want to agree with other people because social media creates these gulfs between people.
Exactly.
And so, you know, you look at people talking about their lived experiences and the traumas they might have faced. And I'm thinking of Dame Kelly Holmes, who came out as a lesbian about 2 weeks ago. And a lot of the response I saw online from heterosexual people was saying, what's the problem? It's all fine now. Well, she wasn't born now. She was born 52 years ago. And that trauma lives with people who've been through those experiences. And there's a lack of empathy, I think, at the moment to put yourself in other people's shoes. And I think when that becomes a politically expedient approach, that's when you start to go down a darker path.
Just going to steer us on to the next topic, but you're absolutely right. And I think, me personally, I think that the government thrives off that division. It thrives off those culture wars, and that's what's real.
Well, this particular Conservative Party does, because they don't have any center. So it's a lot of fun for them to actually do this, and also the opposition is fighting amongst themselves, so it's all, you know, possible.
Bit of a mess, isn't it, Bonnie?
It's human stuff.
Switching gears now to our next topic. So, Prince Charles, is he fit to be king? So, just weeks ago we saw Jubilee fever sweep the nation, but as we move closer to Prince Charles being our king, given his history, his scandals, this week we heard about £3 million worth of cash being stuffed into suitcases and Fortnum & Mason carrier bags. I mean, is he going to command the same level of popularity? And is he even fit to be king? Mahyar, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because what do we mean by being fit? Because I think we have high expectations now. The bar is so high because of Elizabeth II. Even those who disagree with her or don't even like her crown, but they would say that she kept the kind of more stable crown. I mean, not her kids, but in reality, I'd like to say that I want to have hope that the moment he becomes king and the people around him would say, shut up. but in reality, I'm not really sure, because my position or skepticism is not really about, as a right-winger, saying, oh, Charles is a lefty, he talks about environment. That's not my problem with him. My problem is these sort of things, like a Qatari story that came out, the lack of kind of any sort of conviction that he is now in the transition period already, as in for the crown. You would expect him to use it as a training ground to show more of a I'm here now, but he's still behaving like the prince. And I'm like, I just wanted to be like, are you sure you're ready? Again, we can't consider it as an outsider, but like, oh, come on, be ready. It's easy to do that. No. But in reality, I don't want it to be the end of, if we're going to have the end of the crown, then I'd rather do it in a proactive way rather than a reactive way, not accidentally turn into a chaotic republic.
Or we're going to have much choice in the matter. But Benjamin, what do you think? Are you going to have the bunting out for Prince Charles?
I mean, look, I am a monarchist, and if I were designing a country from scratch, it definitely wouldn't have a monarchy, but that's not the situation we're in. And I think it is beneficial to Britain on the world stage to have the monarchy. And I think that the modern, the Queen Elizabeth II's era she's had a huge amount of discipline and has shown genuine public service, and has, there's been rare examples of her exploiting it. I think she's done a very good job. Now, I don't believe, as Mahyar raises the question, can Charles change when he becomes King Charles III? No, I think of the Maya Angelou quote of, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. Well, we know who he is. He's interfering, he's arrogant, he's not got a great deal of self-discipline. That will be the king that he is. Now, he will be king because the second that Mummy dies, he is the head of our state and I think something like 15 others. Now, there is a slight irony to this, because we get wound up by him taking €3 million in cash, which wasn't illegal, as they were at pains to point out, to fund his charities. But, Henry VIII had 6 wives and beheaded 2 of them.
Okay, it's a race to the bottom then, Benjamin.
And Edward VIII, Edward VIII, was a Nazi sympathiser that went gallivanting around the world and writing for US newspapers about the Nazis after the war.
He's comparatively decent.
Well, I'm just sort of putting it in context. We've had much worse than King Charles will be.
Bonnie's putting some faces. What are you thinking, Bonnie?
Well, I'm only laughing because, first of all, my name is Bonnie because of Prince Charles. And actually, I told him that once, and he just sort of started laughing. But he and I are exact contemporaries, so I've watched him as I was growing up. In the 60s, when we were doing all kinds of things, Charles was very strange to us. In the 70s, when we were doing all sorts of things, Charles was also very strange. In the 80s, when he got married to Lady Diana, which I refused to watch because I just thought, please. He was also very strange. So Charles is going to be perfect, mainly because...
He's strange.
First of all. And secondly, the British want a monarchy.
Do they?
Absolutely.
I don't know that
Absolutely.
I
know you don't. But let me explain what I mean. People get really upset when I say this. This country has only been a republic once for like 2 seconds in its whole history. And then it buried Oliver Cromwell, who created the republic, with a crown on his head. He's buried with a crown. And also his son was so to succeed. I don't think... There have been kings and queens here for 1,000 years. This monarch is in a relatively unbroken line, almost unbroken from Alfred the Great, okay? Other countries have come in. She's the German branch but from Alfred the Great, okay? So you have to sit back, if you're looking at a brand, you have to sit back and think, there's something here that these people like. Now, they may not accept it, but it's true. And I'm going to go back to what I said before. I didn't say this country was anti-democratic. I said this country is not comfortable with democracy because I don't think most British people trust the person next door to govern them.
Exactly.
They think if somebody comes and wants to run for office, unconsciously, they're on the take.
Yeah.
Or something else is happening. So let's have this stopgap here.
People and politicians.
These people who are not going to be taking any money, they're not going to be people. But really, seriously, I'm serious.
Yeah.
They're not going to be taking any money. I don't have to worry about them. You know, Keir Starmer, oh, he's a lawyer. Oh, Boris is this. Oh, you know, Jeremy was this. Oh, but not Charles. So what Charles will do, because he's not dumb, he knows that he's not going to have as long a time as his mother had. So what he's going to do is he's going to whittle the family down, because that's what people want. He's already done it. He's already running the show. So when you saw the balcony, you saw what it was going to be. So it's going to be him, William, Kate, their kids, end of. And that's what people want. And people will be happy.
Yeah.
And then when Charles is done, his time is up, which I hope is long as it refers to me. And when Charles' time is up, then William is already poised to run this show. It's going to run and run. And I'll tell you the other thing, one quick thing I want to say as an American observing this. You have to realize that the Windsors pulled off probably the biggest branding in the 20th century when they changed their name from Gotha to Windsor. That was very smart. They're light years ahead of all of us in terms of PR. They know everything. Are you questioning why Andrew hasn't shown up? It's not because they don't necessarily want him to. He's family. It can't fly. So Charles told his mother, no. William is behind him. Harry's out. That's the end of it. It'll happen because that's what
about the whole situation.
I'm sorry.
So to your point, you don't think, because my personal, I understand why people have got a fondness for the Queen. I get it. It's a bit like
she's an old lady, and she's your grandmother. Yeah. Sure.
But for me personally, what the monarchy represents, which is classism, division, elitism.
You're right.
I just don't think, look, I think the monarchy should die with Queen Elizabeth.
It's not going to.
I
Even
wish
if he dies,
it
those things
would.
that you said, they won't die.
They won't. Those things won't die. Thank you.
Those will transfer to something else, which is politicians, people, society. So it's best to actually keep it there, because the magic of...
It's not going to die.
The classism that we talk about, that version of it doesn't really exist much anymore.
Listen,
we have the financial class.
We've got in this country...
It's only for the upper classes.
We've got in this country an unelected upper chamber, which votes on legislation. That is the monarchy. That's the real monarchy. Crown in Parliament, where the Prime Minister can turn around and give Paul Dacre or Joe Bloggs a peerage for life, and they go and they affect your life, because the lower chamber, which is what we elect, then it goes to an upper. What the hell is that about? It goes to the House of Lords. That's monarchy. Yeah. Nobody is going to abolish the House of Lords. That's what needs to go. Yeah. Forget when they go, then monarchy is gone. Forget Charles. Yeah. They're just rich people. Monarchy is gone when the House of Lords is gone. And nobody's talking about it.
That's a good point.
But I think one of the reasons the royal family has worked is because they have accepted a level of discipline, at least under Queen Elizabeth, that they must earn their place there, which sounds like an absurd thing to say, because, of course, by definition, it's not earned, but they've recognised that they have to earn the trust of the people in a modern setting. And I think my danger about Prince Charles is that he doesn't seem to have that sense, and
of what?
Of having to have the discipline, of having to avoid making any political statements,
for example,
not involving
Rwanda.
And I agree with him on Rwanda, but he was completely wrong.
But that's not his. That's not his generation. See, that's why I'm saying why they're smart. See, Charles, even though he didn't participate in the '60s, that's what he is. So Charles is going to do all the stuff that 60s people used to do. Watch and see. He came up in the 70s with this whole idea of the environment. Everybody laughed at him. Yeah. Everybody laughed at him. Now he's on point, because that's what 60s people did. And he's going to do the same thing. He's going to live that 60s life that he never had. And he's going to do it in front of us. William is one who's going to be the one who's going to lower the hammer, not Charles.
Something I'd ask you, Bonnie, is you say that the country doesn't like democracy. But Britain is one of the longest, most stable parliamentary democracies. So
I didn't say it wasn't. I didn't say it wasn't.
I'm asking, how do you talk me through that?
Okay, I'll do it really quickly. First of all, having a discussion about a monarchy is actually absurd, but we do. Secondly, that we have here, to me, what's really scary, is we have 900 people who vote on legislation. Now, you can say, oh, they don't affect anything, and that's true. They can't override serious legislation from the lower chamber, but they exist. And they exist by fiat. So that is why I say that deep down inside, democracy is not settled in this country. And one of the reasons why the royal family exists, or we even have a discussion about it, is because they're a stopgap for people who think things won't get out of control. I promise you, I mean, I listen to people arguing about politicians, and a lot of it is about corruption. But it's not about corruption in and of itself. It's about, why would you want to stand up and run the country? You must be getting paid, or something is going on with you.
That's what we yeah.
And that's what the really bad people keep promulgating. So the House of Lords is royalty in this country, and that's what people should be aiming for, is to get rid of the House of Lords.
I mean, I think you make an excellent point, and it reminds me of when you look at, you know, a US chat show and a British one. So in a US chat show, if someone says, I don't know, Paris Hilton says she's become a billionaire herself, you know, someone says they've had #1 in 50 countries, the audience will cheer and whoop and be delighted.
Yeah.
But if, you know, Jessie J, for example, who's quite a strong-minded artist in this country, she goes on television and talks about how brilliantly talented she is, everyone thinks that's terribly uncouth. Wait, why are you doing that? Who do you think you are? And you find that, I think, a lot in this country with one of the things that holds people back from working class families, and I think actually that's the debate we're coming on to, but is that when they go out and try and go into a world that isn't the one they're from, actually the families often look at them in this country and think, why are you doing that? Who do you think you are?
Exactly, and I found that out here. And I mean, you have to almost be a foreign person to see how rigid all of that is. And it's baked into the culture, and so therefore the royal family exists as a way to make sure that there's a space I can go to. There's a free space I can go to. These people, they don't need any money. These people, they don't want anything. They're just born into this, so therefore they're okay. It's deeply unconscious, but it's there.
Yeah, it's that authority figure, the God factor, the mommy-daddy issue that we all have in ourselves. So if we have it in the concept of the form of a magical crown, like Santa Claus, it's better than actual authority.
I find this insane. I find this absolutely insane. It's the stuff of fairy tales.
Well, it is, but
people like it.
It's better than having an actual dictator. Imagine if, like, the
But it doesn't need to be like that. I wouldn't even mind if we had more like France's approach to thing, where it's not just a ceremonial position that means nothing, that just is a waste of everyone's time.
Yeah.
It's actually a way of having checks and balances.
But what I'm saying is that I agree with everything you're saying. I'm saying that the British people actually don't want that. You see, they don't actually want that, and they've never demonstrated over 800 years that they do. Now, there have been whittling downs of royal. I always say, and people get really angry with me. At the Glorious Revolution, 1688, when it was time to get rid of a king, this country invited a king to do it. The people didn't do it. They invited over the daughter of the king and her husband. They did it. So if you step back and look at that and you ask yourself, that was a moment, because people really wanted to get rid of James. That was a moment. They didn't take it. And not only that, they had a republic, which they used to oppress Ireland with and everything else. That republic lasted a few years, and then they invited Charles back, and then Charles made fun of the country, and then brought on, then his insane brother came. So, you know, you have to ask, and not only that, one quick thing, when the country was definitely Protestant in the 18th century, and decided didn't want to be Catholic anymore and to get rid of the Stuarts, instead of taking the opportunity to be a republic, because republicanism was brewing in France, they went number 59 down the list to find a Protestant to sit on the throne of this country. And that's where this family, number 5859, 5859 down a list, because everybody else was Catholic, because they needed a king. And you do have to ask yourself, very frankly, that must be what you want.
Gosh, what a beautiful segue, by the way, to our third and final topic, where we want to double click on things like class. So, social mobility in this country. We know that class and race are two big barriers to social mobility. Do we think one is more of a barrier than the other? Mahyar, what do you think?
I mean, on a practical level, these days, the differences in what sort of barrier is more important. I mean, it is mostly still psychological. It's like basically the combination of the two. Because the financial side, technically, in this country, it's not really guaranteed that if you're born poor, you will remain poor. It's not 100%. And it's also not 100% that if you're poor, then you definitely become rich. But it is a combination of the whole kind of the environment around you, but it also goes with everything else in terms of the logistics. So in terms of areas, there's schools, parenting, and everything else, which means there's no one solution. I'm a libertarian, but libertarianism is not a thing here, because the whole system, a previous topic we were talking about, it's a systemic country, this country. So it's in a very soft way authoritarian country. So libertarianism will not work. So either you're going to have basically all the fingers in all pies in terms of a politician or government. So social democracy maybe it's called, maybe paternalistic conservatism.
Let's do that.
Well, paternalistic conservatism, they also have the same vision, but from the other side. They want to have intervention. Maybe that's the solution, but it's not a perfect solution because it hasn't really fully worked. But libertarianism also hasn't worked because it doesn't really work in terms of the utopia. So the barriers obviously exist it's case by case in this country rather than kind of a systemic for demographics. Like in a country like Iran, where I'm born from, in each region there are cities and regions where if you're poor, you're definitely just poor. That's the end of the world. Or if you're rich, if you're corrupt enough, you will always remain rich. So it's not the same here, but it's more of a complicated situation.
My concern is that actually we're seeing social mobility slow down under Tory governments, and we're seeing that division between certainly class and wealth, which I think is going to mean people who are poor stay poor, and people who are rich just jump further and further ahead. What are your thoughts, Benjamin?
I was going to say, I actually wanted to hear from Bonnie first, just because
On the question.
on the question of race and class, I think.
It's still race. It's still the color of your skin. And then when you divide that, it's what religion you practice. So, for example, you can be from, I use the term Middle East only because of it, but if you're Muslim, you're in bigger trouble than you are if you practice any other religion. And if you're of African descent, you're in bigger trouble if you're African Caribbean. So you can turn up at a door as who you are. The assumptions made about you still by people, if you're a black person, they're still there. I know people who work in the city who are partners in firms, and they come after hours and the people tell them to go around the back and go in the service entrance. And you kind of like, you have to make a decision in your mind. Am I going to get upset about this and mess my own head up? Or am I just going to explain to this person and then they can apologize to me, whatever. So black people have to go through this sort of hoop every day, and Muslims have to, if you practice it, if you're practicing Muslim. I mean, our mayor has a bigger police guard than the Queen because he's practicing Muslim. So these are realities, and they're not going to go away soon, mainly because what we need in place in this country, and I go back to my sort of contention about democracy, we need in place a black person who has been elected to a position, I don't know how that's going to happen, where people then can begin to
Respect?
I would say respect, but also, I would hate the word normalize, but because you're not normalized yet in this culture. We still aren't. Like I said, I've been here since '86, and the stuff I've seen, the stuff that's happened to me, I mean, let me just divide that up even further. If you're an American, African American, your class is higher than if you are Black British And that's how, because Britain works in classes. So I know in the old days, a lot of Black British people from the Caribbean would sometimes affect American accents just so they could just get a job. So it's still that way, a little bit. So this is a class-orientated system, a society. The society deals in classes. Either your class is your color or your class is your education. And a lot of people send their kids to the best schools so they can actually come out of a class. But that's the whole sort of energy of this country. And, you know, that's what needs to stop. And I don't know how it's going to stop, because I think there's something comfortable about it for people. There's something where if you know what class someone is, or you assume, there's something you don't have to worry about. You don't have to be afraid
It's easier to deal with
of.
as well. It's like playing a Monopoly game. Everyone knows where everybody stands, and you know it's more familiar. I mean, to be fair, I absolutely agree. On the other hand, the class, when the way we say class, my view is different to what we would have called class in the 19th century, which is more black and white and more kind of simplified. It is more broader. But would you just, out of curiosity, agree that, at least in terms of how we feel, that whilst the class is the way we see skin color here, and based on skin color and just different regions and accents, firstly, I see it here in this country more of a tribalist classes thing.
When you say tribalist,
if you use the example of African American accent, it already brings you up slightly higher in terms of the eyes of some people prejudiced. So that kind of means that our prejudice and our class prejudice is based on tribe, not tribe in terms of actual areas, but tribes in terms of cultural tribe and mentality tribes. And also in terms of racism, would you agree that it's still less here than the rest of mainland Europe, or even maybe parts of America?
well, I was in a town, I won't say where, but I was in a very English town giving a lecture. And I was on the street, and there weren't any Black people on that street. Everyone was very nice to me. And I wonder if they would have been nice to my friends. I was, you know, I've never lost my accent. I mean, maybe if Chicagoans will hear me now and think, oh, yes, you have. But I never have. And it's overt, and it's also covert. There's also regional prejudice. So if you add up color, region, and where you went to school, they say what your father did, that's not good. It's still here. And people actually make a crusade or a virtue out of being the class, say, that people don't like, but that's still about class. So, you know, I don't know if this is because, as you say, people are more relaxed with that, they feel better. America, there is class, for instance. It's very subtle, though. For example, if you have a Southern accent and you're white, you're assumed to be stupid. Now, that's an unconscious thing. It's not what people say. But if you come from Kentucky and you're a broadcaster, you're assumed to be stupid, especially if you're a woman. Okay. If you are if you come from the East Coast and you have a Boston accent, you're assumed to be snooty. So the best accent to have is a Chicago, Midwestern, Michigan accent, which is flat. And if you're from Texas, you're a redneck or you're dumb. If you're from LA, like Meghan Markle, which is actually quite funny because she's very LA, which makes me laugh when she's here because people are freaking out. I'm thinking that she's just from Los Angeles, relax. But I would say that because I'm Midwest, East Coast. So it's all there, but it's more subtle than it is here.
But I mean, I think, you know, in this country, class is a massive part of it. And you hit upon the point I was going to make, which is that people judge you on your parents en masse. It is a normal way to behave. My parents were both drug addicts. They were both in prison at various points during my childhood. And I remember, as a primary school age kid who was very well behaved and geeky and fairly quiet, and the other parents of kids in my class when I was 10, 11 years old would not let me go to their birthday parties because of who my dad is and the way he behaves. Yeah. And that remained the case. You know, when my dad went to prison, and that was in the local newspapers, none of them would let me socialise with their kids in secondary school until people start to quite make the decisions for themselves. And that wasn't based on who I was, that was based on where I came from. And it kind of gave me, frankly, a chip on my shoulder because I was probably brighter than their kids, certainly better behaved, less rebellious.
And nicer.
And yet, indeed, and more open-minded. And dare say, in the long run, it benefited me as a rounded person.
Did that actually prove to be a catalyst for you?
Sure, but, and you know, you don't...
Why have to go through that to be, you know...
Agreed.
And I think that's revealing of the way this country works. And it also works the other way because, you know, we've talked about monarchy and the aristocrats, and look at Boris Johnson. You know, there is an attitude in this country that people that look and present and talk in a certain way should be in charge.
Thank you.
And so that is why Boris Johnson can behave in all sorts of ways.
Absolutely, 100%.
But the assumption of who should be in charge sounds and looks fits him. Well, take Tony Blair, even he fits into that category.
David Cameron. Let me ask you a question then. How much do you think, because we're all in performance, let's just face it, okay? Because that's what we are. How much do you think that the fact of your parents, you have built a kind of performance for yourself? And do you think that has you paid a price? You personally have paid a price?
Yeah, I suppose one of the reasons why it frustrated me so much as a kid and still as an adult was because I was building that performance to be as far away from my parents as possible. So my family don't talk like this. They don't have particularly strong Mancunian accents, but they have Mancunian accents or Yorkshire accents or Canadian accents. This accent isn't in my family. And I, as a young kid, primary school age kid, started to change the way I spoke because I wanted to sound better, to put it in the crassest.
You wanted to survive.
Yeah.
You wanted to survive.
And that's where the performance came from.
And be a person.
And so, you know, this is who I am today. I can't sort of change the way I speak, but that was created from a very young age. And in fact, even though I grew up in Manchester, I would say Bath and last.
But you see, this is interesting.
Because that was creating the performance.
If you were American and you had the background you had, that would be a plus for you. Okay, people would feel that they related to you more, that you were able to overcome, whether you did or not, you came through it, you made something of your life, you're a successful person. In America, people would love that. You would be really, really big there because of these things. Because that's part of the American dream, which is bogus, but that's part of the American dream. Here, as you say, you have to hide that in order for, and that's class.
We see this in our politics.
Otherwise they'll bring you down.
You look at Angela Rayner, for example. She doesn't sound like
that is outrageous what's happened to her.
And when she obviously had her, you know, ding-dong with Boris Johnson, and, you know, the tabloids actually came out, and it was always questioning, like, you know, she couldn't take on Boris Johnson with his Oxford debating skills. Like, who is she to even dare? Whereas actually, what people don't understand is the people like Angela Rayner, or yourself, and I have a similar, not to say similar background, but very working class background. Mum and dad were immigrants. Mum was a dinner lady. Dad worked every job he could do.
Where'd they come from?
Sicily.
Okay, good. I thought you were Italian.
I
did, of course. I made her up.
But my point is if you've come from that privileged background and you have got to that position where you are now, where Angela Rayner is, you deserve more respect than the people that are on a conveyor belt.
But you know what? Let me just say this as somebody who is looking at this from the outside. See, what Angela Rayner should have done, she should have crossed the floor and slapped his face. Or anybody who would have... Yes, no, and actually you can't do that in the House of Commons, because that's illegal. But she should have slapped his face verbally or whatever. Because all the assumptions about working class woman who's trying to get through the world, who's a pretty woman as well, it was outrageous. And I think women in this country should have stood up and said, wait a minute, okay? Because that's what I'm saying about class. Every woman in this country should have stood up, whether they were conservative, whatever, and said, wait a minute. You mean you can't be a woman, you can't be pretty, you can't
Have legs?
Exactly. And that's what you're accused of? Oh, no. But people don't do that. Yeah. So I think what I feel optimistic about listening to you speak now, all of you, is I think if we can nail these things, we can see these things, we can see that class is intrinsic to this country, class is this country, it's the beginning of being liberated from it. It's the beginning. It isn't going to happen overnight. And in relation to Charles is part of the class system. William is part of the class system. They are absurd to people outside of this country. And that is what is important to keep in mind. The whole of it is absurd. Now, within that absurdity, the House of Lords, the royal family, is the beginning of the liberation, not before.
Yeah, absolutely agree. You don't know what you don't know, but here it's like, we know what we don't know. We're on our way to awareness, and only when we're aware can we solve
You can begin. And I have a lot of faith in the next generations to really sort this. I really do. I think it'll happen.
I hope so.
I think it'll happen.
It's been such a fascinating debate tonight. Thank you so much. I feel like I've got brain full of food for thought. And thank you for tuning in. Let us know what you thought. Pop in your comments beneath the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to tune in next week for more heated debate.